Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going deep on something that's been getting a lot of attention lately. Um, Loneliness.
Yeah, always a relevant topic.
It really is, and we actually got a request from you guys, our listeners, to dig into this. You sent over the APA's latest poll on loneliness, and it's got some really interesting findings, especially for those of you listening in the, listeners' age range.
Right.
So to help us break it all down, we've got our expert here.
Hey everyone, happy to be here, ready to dive in.
Okay, so the APA found that a full third of Americans are experiencing loneliness on like a weekly basis. So we're not just talking about, feeling a little bit isolated every now and then. This is like a persistent thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because those numbers, that's just people who are willing to admit it.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, there's a lot of stigma still around loneliness. So, the reality is it's probably even more widespread than those numbers would suggest.
That's a really good point. I mean, it's not something that people, easily talk about. So,
Mhm.
so diving into some of the specifics from the APA's poll, they found that 30% of people experience loneliness weekly, and another 10% say it's like an every single day thing.
Wow.
But here's where it gets like even more interesting, I think, for our younger listeners in particular. The poll found that 30%, a significant chunk of those aged 18 to 34, are grappling with, daily or weekly loneliness. What could be driving that in a generation that
Yeah.
we often think of as being like hyper-connected?
Well, I think it's a complex issue, obviously. Um, but if I had to venture some guesses, I would say that there's a lot of pressure on young adults today, right?
Right.
They're constantly comparing themselves to others on social media. They're trying to succeed in a job market that's constantly changing.
Yeah.
And there's this pressure to present this perfect image online, and
Yeah.
and I think all of that can be incredibly
It's
isolating.
like this pressure to seem like you have it all figured out, which probably makes those who don't or feel like they don't feel, even worse.
Exactly, exactly. And speaking of different life stages, the poll also looked at the impact of relationship status on loneliness, and they found that single adults are nearly twice as likely to report experiencing loneliness weekly compared to people who are married.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like almost 40% for those who are single versus 22% for married folks, that's a pretty big difference. But I'm guessing it's not as simple as saying like, oh, well, if you're married, then you know you're not lonely.
Exactly, exactly. While having a partner can certainly provide companionship and support, marriage doesn't completely erase the possibility of feeling lonely. In fact, there are different types of loneliness, and some can actually exist within relationships as well.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. For example, you can experience emotional loneliness, which is when you feel misunderstood or emotionally disconnected from your partner. So even if you're physically present with someone, you can still feel a sense of emptiness or a lack of fulfillment in that relationship.
That's a really interesting point. Loneliness within a relationship. That's a whole other deep dive.
Right. Exactly.
But going back to the EPA's poll, they asked people to kind of compare how they're feeling now to how they felt before the pandemic. And it seems, kind of intuitive to think that everyone would say, oh, I'm definitely lonelier now. But the results weren't quite so clear cut.
Right. Right. It's
It was more nuanced than that.
Yeah. 25% of the people polled said that they were lonelier post-pandemic, which, isn't surprising, but a full 23% actually said that they were less lonely.
Wow.
Interesting. Yeah, and so, it seems to suggest that for some people, maybe the pandemic, forced them to kind of reevaluate their priorities and maybe led them to have a greater appreciation for the connections that they did have.
Yeah. So it's like, even though it was this shared, uh, you know, difficult experience,
Right.
like it actually brought some people closer together.
Exactly, exactly. Right. But, on the other hand, for people who are already kind of on the edge, already kind of struggling with loneliness, being forced to isolate, even though it was important, right?
Yeah.
To slow the spread and everything, it could have made things even worse for them.
It's kind of like this double-edged sword in a way.
Yeah.
Like some people found this like unexpected connection, and then other people really felt that isolation even more intensely. And speaking of connection, or maybe like the illusion of connection, we can't really talk about this without talking about technology, right?
Right.
And the APA's poll really dove into this, and I found this part so interesting. So like on the surface, it it seems like technology is doing good things here, right? Most people said that technology actually helps them form new relationships,
Yeah.
that they stay connected more often, because of technology, and that like overall it's a benefit to their social life.
Yeah, it's interesting how, technology can can kind of be this weird almost like a paradox, right?
Right.
Like it has the power to bring us together in ways that we never could have imagined before, but then it also comes with this whole other set of challenges.
Absolutely. And the poll kind of throws us the curveball here because then it asks people, okay, but does it foster meaningful relationships or is it more superficial? And Americans are basically split down the middle on this. It's almost 54% saying meaningful and then 46% saying superficial. So is technology our like social savior in this loneliness epidemic or is it actually making things worse?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
And I think the fact that there is this split, really kind of highlights how complex the issue is.
Yeah.
Technology in and of itself isn't inherently good or bad when it comes to our social connections. It's all about how we use it, right? So, it can be a really powerful tool for maintaining relationships that we already have. We can stay in touch with people who live far away. We can connect with people who share our interests.
Yeah.
But, we have to keep in mind that it's not a substitute, like a replacement for actual, genuine face-to-face interaction.
Right. It's very different to like somebody's post
Hmm.
than to actually have a conversation.
Exactly, exactly.
Right. And then you have things like, that social comparison, the FOMO, like constantly feeling like you're missing out.
Right, right. And all the, kind of curated,
Yeah.
perfect images that we see on social media, they can really create this distorted sense of reality.
Okay.
We end up comparing our lives to these, often unrealistic portrayals, and that can make us feel inadequate or envious, which, again, just fuels that sense of loneliness.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of thinking like, oh, everybody else's life is so exciting and picture perfect and mine is,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
boring and the same all the time. So if technology is this kind of like double-edged sword, right?
Right.
How do we deal with that? How do we navigate that? And the APA poll also asked people, okay, so what do you do when you're feeling lonely? And this is so interesting.
Okay.
So what do you think, like, what do you think is like the most common thing that people do when they're feeling lonely?
I don't know.
Take a guess.
Spend time with loved ones.
That's a good guess, but actually it's distraction. So things like watching TV, and actually kind of ironically scrolling through social media.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like they're turning to the very thing that might be contributing to the problem in the first place.
Right. It's
Yeah.
it seems counterintuitive.
It is. It is. And I think it highlights, the difference between those sort of short-term, ways of coping versus those more long-term solutions.
Right.
So distractions, they can numb the feelings for a little while, but they're not actually getting at like the root of the problem.
Right.
And the poll did also find that people do turn to, healthier coping strategies like going for a walk, spending time with loved ones, playing with the pet, things that actually foster that, real sense of connection.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Those things, even though they seem kind of simple in a way, they're tapping into that human need for connection, right?
Absolutely.
Like that our phones just can't really replicate, or at least not in the same way. So if we know that scrolling on our phones isn't the answer, where do people actually find that sense of community, that sense of belonging? And the APA, they asked about this too, and the top three were really really telling, I think. So like where do you think people said that they feel the greatest sense of belonging?
Well, I would imagine family would be high on that list.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, family, friends, and then neighborhoods were the top three.
Interesting.
So it seems like it really is those close-knit in-person
Yeah.
connections where people are really, really finding that sense of belonging.
Yes. Makes sense.
Right. There's something to be said for being physically present with people, for sharing experiences, for building those real life bonds that you just can't get through a screen, or at least not in the same way.
Yeah. And it speaks to that fundamental human need for belonging, which is
Yeah.
more than just being connected, right? It's about feeling seen and heard and valued for who you are. It's about feeling like you're part of something larger than yourself. Um, and online communities, while they can be great for certain things, for connecting with people who share your interests, they often don't offer that same depth of connection as the relationships that we build in person. And
Yeah.
and actually, it's interesting to note that online communities, they ranked fairly low in the APA poll. I think it was only like 3% of people.
Yeah, it's almost like, you can have a quick chat with somebody at a coffee shop, but that's very different than like years of shared history and
Exactly.
experiences and inside jokes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think, the takeaway here is that while technology has obviously like completely changed the way that we connect with each other, it's really important to kind of maintain that balance, right?
Yeah,
And to make sure that we're prioritizing those real life, meaningful connections that really give us that deep sense of belonging.
for sure, for sure. So where does this leave us? I mean, we've gone over, some pretty surprising statistics, I think, about loneliness, especially among, young adults. And we've talked about this kind of like double-edged sword of technology. Is it helping? Is it hurting? What would you say is like the biggest takeaway for our listeners today?
When I look at the APA's findings, I think the thing that really strikes me is that age gap, right? Where, you've got these younger generations who seem to be experiencing these really intense feelings of loneliness, even though they have, more access to technology, more ways to connect with people than ever before. And so it kind of makes you wonder, what is it about the way that they're engaging with the world, with each other, that's contributing to this.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something for all of us to think about,
Yeah.
especially if you're in that younger age group. But I think this deep dive has really given us a lot to chew on, right?
Yeah.
This idea that loneliness is so prevalent, and then this question of technology and how we use it and how it's impacting us.
Right. And I think, just the understanding that loneliness is a human experience. It's something that we all go through at some point. And especially in this day and age where, we're constantly bombarded with images and messages that make it seem like everyone else has it all figured out.
Yeah,
But the reality is that a lot of us are struggling with this, and so I think, acknowledging that is really important.
absolutely.
And then from there, it's like, okay, well, what can we do about it? What's one small step that you can take today to either combat loneliness in your own life, or to reach out to somebody else who might be struggling?
Right.
And it could be something as simple as, putting down your phone for a little while and actually having a face-to-face conversation with somebody, or joining a local club or group, or even just smiling at somebody on the street. Like, these small acts of connection can make a really big difference.
Absolutely, they really can. And that is all the time that we have for today's deep dive. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.